Welcome back, everybody. Dean Lloyd here again for Just Conversations, solution-focused communication with the goal of informing systemic change. And tonight, or today, wherever you are, as always, my next guest needs no introduction. Over to you, Ivan.
Thanks ever so much, Dean. I'm sure we all need a little bit of introduction, just so we know who is talking in the room. So my name's Ivan Calder. My current role is Chief Executive Officer for a non-government organisation called Health Through Wars. And we deliver healthcare in places of detention in low and middle income countries, working with ministries of health and ministries of justice. I used to work in Australia for our Australian audience out there. One of the highlights of my career, I was there for 10 years and had the joy of working in the New South Wales correctional system, which was a growth experience, shall we say, and then came down to Victoria and had the opportunity to work in custodial operations as one of the commissioners in that space. I love what I do. I'm really delighted, Dean, that you've asked me to be here, and let's talk.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining a little bit of your history and why you might be here. So I heard of Ivan when I was running an employment program or starting to try and get some work in, and I've only heard good words about you, which is very rare in those sorts of environments. And then I traveled on my fellowship and I reached out to Ivan because he was in New York at the time. So the work, you're still doing that same work now, yes?
Yeah, that's correct. New York is just a base where we happen to live, but
Yeah.
my work is all over the world. Yeah.
Okay, so understanding now that you travel globally in and out of sort of correctional settings, some of the similarities and overlaps where you see value and where where you could implement other or what's successful in those societies and environments. Yeah,
Yeah.
anything you can give us insight to there?
Yeah, that's an interesting one and a bloody big question.
Yeah, it is.
If I'm not allowed to swear, you'll have to edit me afterwards. In terms of the prevailing similarities, so I do a lot of work in Africa and the Caribbean, and it doesn't always translate into more developed justice systems. But what I'm seeing for the 12 million people that we have incarcerated, and that figure still blows my mind internationally, I think that's 12 million too many. Most of the jurisdictions, most of the countries in which I work, whether it's Australia, whether it's the UK, whether it's the States, and now whether it's more focused in Africa, they're on a reform journey. And so there is a spotlight going on across justice systems, which is really trying to finally grip the Nelson Mandela rules and the Bangkok rules to look at the standards in places of detention. And looking at them and doing something about them are two different things, as we know. But the minimum standards set out the basic human rights, as the audience will probably know, around access to food, access to water, support for mental health, access to electricity. I mean, some very basic things here, being treated with dignity and respect, having the right to be safe. And there are many countries that I have worked in that have a terrible human rights violations history. So beating people who are incarcerated, many of whom are often unsentenced. Not that that makes a jot of difference, but I just think in this day and age, it's 2024, how can this still be going on? Some people being killed for trying to escape places of detention in which they're starving. Never has it been more important that justice systems get looked at and supported to change. I've worked in a few justice systems and love them or hate them. And if you've got experience of being in them, that experience is unique for all of us. So that's my disclaimer. my personal and professional view, the systems I've worked in with varying degrees of success have all wanted to change. The inhibitors to change, as we know, are often staff who have come into correctional systems for maybe entirely the wrong reasons, and generally it's related to power and bullying. But there's a cohort of people, and I see it as a growing cohort, particularly in Australia, particularly in the UK, step change in America, not fast enough, but moving in the right direction, about caring about the men and the women and horribly the children who we have incarcerated in places of detention, and wanting to see them supported to change. And I take real joy in that mindset shifting, Dean. You know, that sense of prison is not somewhere where you just throw away the trash of society, not my view, but a prevailing view. You turn a key, you throw the key away, your job is done, and the good people who happen to be milling around outside of the prison walls, and I use good sparingly, you know, can sleep at night because justice has been served. And for any of us that have been involved in justice in any way, shape, or form that have half a wit, we'll be thinking, hold on, the acquittal of justice is one thing, but actually it's what can we do before people come into prison, see them diverted, after they leave prison, and whilst they're in prison. And all of those things, your question, you know, what are the parallels that are running through different jurisdictions that are working? Diversion programs, not enough of them, but getting people who should never come into contact with criminal justice systems streamed away. It was one of my great joys and one of my great frustrations in Victoria, actually, looking at diversion programs for the Aboriginal population. And, you know, there were a couple of pilots that we managed to get up and running that managed to have a modicum of success. But I wanted universal, as did many of us, universal rollout so that we've got key populations that don't touch justice. And it's the same for people who are homeless. It's the same for people who are mentally ill. It's the same for people who happen to offend because they're in survival mode or dealing with trauma. And by the time you go through every group, there's no one left, which is, you know, a case in point, all on its own. So I see some good steps in absolutely the right direction. And I think we need more of that, and we need to be fearless in challenging some of the old historic poor behaviours that don't help anybody, don't reduce recidivism. But, you know, you could always say justice in and of itself is a reaction to a greater symptom in society, which we all know, which is poverty and lack of education and all the trauma associated with being a human being in its worst forms, that doesn't really get looked at or addressed because people just say it's too hard or too big, or there's a political will. And I'm not going to talk about politics because I'll get myself into trouble, but a political will that's very short term. So I will pause for breath. I mean, I love this subject. I could talk for hours, and you just go like this if you want me to stop.
I'm the same. But yeah, it's so true. Prison has become the too hard basket, putting sort of, oh, we just can't deal with it, we'll put them away. So, you know, and what I think society's starting to learn is just because you remove someone, well, at the moment, what we're doing is removing them. We're treating them relatively poorly in a punitive approach, and then expecting them to behave better when they're released without supporting them or helping them, either the community that they left or exiting prison. So there definitely seems to be an appetite. And what I learned on my travels in the Netherlands was, what I witnessed was a humane approach. They definitely have a humane approach.
Yes.
Prison still felt like prison and was prison. Their sentences are far shorter. However, in the Netherlands, your cell is seen as yours. So you can't smoke in general. You can smoke in your cell because that's your place. Just those little humane treatments. I was surprised. I thought they would have or they do, they have a slightly better recidivist rate than we do. However, their early
Yes.
intervention diversionary programs have great
Yes.
success.
Yes. Yes. It's what do you think is the right way? I know you're here to
Yeah,
talk to
yeah.
me,
I
but it's a
know.
conversation.
So I think
I'm interested.
what we've been sold and what we do get sold is the panacea, the silver bullet, because people just want to know that. Whereas we
Yeah.
need a myriad of pathways. So what might work for me won't work for you, but there might be a little
Yeah.
bit of overlap. So we need to
Yes.
create a myriad of pathways and catalysts to support
Yes.
people change. So
Yes. Yes.
behavior change doesn't come in traumatic environments because people are hiding.
Yes.
The
Yes.
prisoner's
Yeah.
B
Yeah.
has a
Yeah.
traumatic
Yeah. Yeah.
experience. So
Yes.
I was arguing with my last person on the podcast. It's like she's lived experience and wanted to put education in. I was like, the problem
Yes.
with education is most of our sentences here are too short for that to sort of, to do
Yeah.
it. However, if you're traumatizing someone, it's very difficult for them to integrate information. So if you're trying to teach someone not to
Yes.
traumatize
Yes.
them, it
Yeah.
can, some people can do it better than others. I'm not saying it is a blanket, you shouldn't do it. However,
Yes.
these are things because then all of a sudden people get released. It's like, why didn't you learn your lesson? It was like, well,
Yes. 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 I was worried
I
for my
can't even remember what
safety, or I
happened because
was
I was
hungry, or
disassociated.
yes. Yeah.
So these things and what, I'm not educated in these areas. However, from my limited understanding and awareness, if if we're in fight, flight, freeze,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the government rhetorics and the political rhetorics, not to get political, but war on drugs, tough on crime, that
Yes.
switches that off.
Yes.
So I feel safe.
Yes.
Whereas
Yes.
if it's
Yes.
on, I don't feel safe. So it's almost what I'm trying to do is how can we implement humane practices into traumatic
Yes.
environments to induce
Yes. Yes.
senses of joy and hope.
Yes. Yes.
A lot of the people I speak to with lived experience, the joy and the hope isn't there. And that's for me
Yes.
too, when I started behaving at that base animal, like I'm just coming to get what it was and whatever it is, and I just need it.
Yes.
So with that
Yes.
sort of removed, it's like that's what I think. I don't know. What do you think about those concepts and ideas?
Oh my goodness. That's it's such a difficult question to answer because it goes to the fundamental paradigm of why do we have justice and why is justice set up
Yeah.
in the way that it is. In countries like East Timor or Singapore, and I'll go to East Timor first, you've got two parallel justice systems. And I think there's something here that is a bit of a nod for what we collectively in justice need to think about for the future. And you've got a recognizable justice system, the type that we would have experienced in Australia or the UK or America, which is acquitted in that country. But you've also then got a community justice, so a head of a community, a head of a tribe, and that community meets out their justice in accordance with their view of the crime. And so you've stolen a sheep, you're going to do X amount of community service, or we're going to take away your house for a year, or you're going to go and live in this part and contribute this to the community. And Singapore, in a much different way, also has this prevailing sense. It's got a very tough justice system, but that crime is a community failure, and
Yeah.
that it's for the community to respond with taking responsibility for the reintegration of the individual, with the individual at the center of that thinking. And so when you get what I will say is patronizing and empty rhetoric around, all right, we're going to rehabilitate you in prison, and we're going to be the cure to all your ills, and actually all of the ills are trauma, housing, employment, stigma, and the list
Yeah,
go
yeah.
mental illness, and the list goes on. And it's like you don't stand a fighting chance. And it's not to say hope is lost, because there's some great organizations doing great work out there, but you can't fix somebody's complexity and wrap it up neatly and put a bow on it, as you know. And so I think there's an opportunity for all systems to think about what the community responsibility is in supporting somebody who's done some hard yards. And I always say, any of us could have wound up in prison. There's things that we've all done that we probably didn't get caught for. And so there's a luck element there. And good people make bad decisions. That's called being human. And I
Even
kind of think, let's help.
most people that I was in prison with I
Yeah.
behaved desperately. I behaved out of desperation. And I
Yes.
think the issue that I would argue is it's very difficult to legislate desperate behavior.
It is. It is. And legislation's the wrong way. The important thing is to say what's going on for you.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
is driving what's driving it. And I guess I would like to see, the whole conversation we've had is about humane treatment and humanity, that much more um individually understood and community responded kind of
Yeah, yeah.
kind of setup. And of course, people don't like that, because it means then they have to, by people, I mean society broadly, they have to take some responsibility and
Yeah,
take a long, hard look at what's going on in their communities. And that makes people feel uncomfortable and accountable.
yeah.
And what we're very good at as human beings is running from responsibility when it doesn't suit us. No judgment, just a statement about the human condition.
I relate to that.
Yeah, well, we've
Yeah,
all been there, and often in recent days as well.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
One of the things that I do like about Singapore, the yellow ribbon, you're across that. So
Talk to me about that. I'm not across it,
a
Dean.
yellow ribbon is a foundation organization, mainly for people exiting prison, but they advocated for, so it's a crime to discriminate against people who have been in custody, from my understanding. However,
Bravo.
so if you discriminated against me once I'd finished my sentence, you could go to jail. So I don't really subscribe to that. However, however, um, I used to say it a lot as well, truth in sentencing. Okay, yeah, I'd love the truth in sentencing. So when I was released, I don't get the perpetual punishment of, I started to face discrimination and disadvantage like 15 years out of prison trying to get into employment. It's like, well, and I'd been since
Crazy.
since release, I'd sort of completed my parole, wobbled a bit around on parole. I'll admit to that. But once I finished that and got up and on sort of and took advantage of all of the stuff that I could, I become a productive member of society. And still,
Just
still to this day, I face a discrimination and disadvantage. And I don't think it's so much directly now. It's more, if me and you went for the job, same qualifications, we got to the last two, when they go to process our applications, they just don't know what to do with mine. And it just becomes easier because the risk and the insurance
yeah.
and it's like, oh, he's got a criminal
Yes. Yeah.
record. They don't really look that it's 20 years old and that I haven't been in trouble since.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, if, something happens, we need to mitigate that risk. So yeah, it's still, I don't feel it's so much of a thing, mainly because I feel like I've proved my worth and value now. However,
Yes.
you know, was employed to do a talk at a university and they couldn't pay us because we had to contract and go through other people to get paid because their policy couldn't employ people with criminal records. So
Which is
we
just
were
crazy.
talking about it. They asked us and invited to talk about the disadvantage that people face and they couldn't employ us and pay us normally, like a normal workplace, because they had a policy where you can't employ people with criminal records.
Did they let you speak about that contradiction, or was it just a bit too
We
close to
touched
home?
on it. We touched on it. The irony of it. So yeah, it was interesting.
I'm laughing because otherwise I would cry. And I often think that the person that we were 15 years ago, whatever we've done, is a version of ourselves that's no longer real. You
Yeah.
know, it's like there's all that learning and life experience that's happened, and there's elements that carry forward, which we call personality. But God, it's so fluid. If you think about your 15-year-old self, your 30-year-old self, your 45-year-old self, and I won't insult either of us and push us into the 60s just yet. But you know, you kind of think it's a version that is no longer relevant, particularly in a job seeking environment. What do you think we should try and do about that? What do you think are the solutions in that space to
Oh,
beating
I
fundamental
understand the rawness,
prejudice?
like the rawness of someone coming out and trying to get into work, you know, if they participate, like, well, for whatever reason. So just ensuring that people are supported and stabilized into employment and employment
Yeah,
opportunities and awarenesses and understanding. That's sort of how I would see it. I am really reluctant, and you know, this is me and just me, but I really don't want to go back and work in prisons anymore. Like, it's not a thing that I want
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
do. It's a
yeah.
bit of a reliving and a bit of a re-traumatization that I've sort of come to
Yes,
reconcile.
yes, yes.
I don't begrudge anyone else from doing that, but that's just my decision. Um, so
Thank
yeah,
heavens we're all
um,
individuals.
pardon?
I said, thank heavens we're all individuals.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, there's space for everyone, I think. And at the moment, there's been a big lived experience with mental health, which is sort of
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
they've got a bit of a blueprint and a framework for it. They're still, I believe, trying to get that down pat, mainly like insurance, like risk. Like if I go for a job and I don't disclose I've got a record, and then I'm driving
yes,
in the car and I have an accident, their insurance is
yes, yes,
because
yes,
I've lied,
yes,
I've
yes,
admitted whatever it
yes,
is. But yeah, so these are things, and I understand risk and HR and all that sort of stuff, but these are things,
yes,
if we're
yes,
putting pressures on people to be not disclose because they really need the work, like that's like how are we contributing to the problem, and how can we not contribute to that problem? You know.
What do you think about schemes, you know, where you've got a government incentive to to actively take somebody who's got a previous criminal record, and so there's like a financial carrot that's being dangled
Yeah.
to help
There, you know,
formally
I think there's
castrate people
opportunity for
in?
them. There's opportunity for
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
I don't know if they're, yeah, it's not something that I would subscribe to. What I try and teach and subscribe to is showing people how to create environments that are safe enough for people to come in,
yes,
and then
yes,
allowing personal
yes,
responsibility. So when people feel safe enough, and for
yeah,
argument's sake, is like, oh, I was doing that over there and I broke it. I made a mistake. So if their leaders
yes,
are saying, oh, I've done that
yes,
and I made a mistake and I broke it, sorry, let's move on.
yes,
Modeling the behavior of how, like, I
yes,
broke it, I'm just going to hide it under here because I don't want to get into trouble. It's like, if you're in
yes,
a safe
yes,
environment, and you know, it really allows innovation and all that sort of stuff, because people will try things and they'll try to improve things and they'll try to do that when they feel
yes,
safe, and they're shown
yes.
how to do that appropriately.
You know, it's you've triggered a couple of things in my head in a good way. One is in my very early career, I was a nurse, but still am a nurse by training, and I worked in the field of addiction. And as we both know, you know, the prisons are either full of drugs or full of people who have used drugs or sold drugs or both. And it's about 80% of the population in many developed countries. And so there's always that link. And when I was working in the community before I touched justice with both hands, um, the conversations I used to have with the men and women who came through the clinic that I worked at, they probably thought it was patronizing. I apologize if anyone's listening and thinking, yeah, I remember those, Ivan. But it was like, I used to hold, and I still do hold this view, that if you can apply the sheer tenacity that's required to be chasing a habit every single day,
Oh yeah.
then you've got incredible skills
Yeah.
in terms of negotiation, agility of thinking, sheer determination. And in that sense, it's to escape trauma. But if you flip them around and apply them for a different end, I think there's that resource to draw on, which leads to my second point, which is in thinking about the locations I've worked in over time, and this is in the industry's readiness for employment space, over time, one of the failings is that there just isn't the breadth of employment in meaningful employment areas that people
Yeah.
would be interested in. And I think that's something we've got to look at critically. But I did see a shift in New South Wales. They they were doing a good job. In Victoria, they were doing a very good job, particularly in approaching employers in those hard to recruit areas, whether it was welding, panel beating, um, being in a duck abattoir. I mean, things that a lot of people
Still
would,
going.
yeah. So, good old Pepe's ducks,
Yeah.
hey?
Yeah. Yeah.
And just a disclaimer for the audience, neither Dean or I are being sponsored by Pepe's ducks, I'll
No.
have you know. No. But they're very and in New South Wales it was bakery, those
Yeah.
2 a.m. starts to get bread out on the shelves. So there were some clear employment pathways, which for many of us would hold no interest
Yeah.
whatsoever. But I guess it's a
And what,
start. It's
so
the
what I would
routine.
talk to employers about, and I'm just mindful of our time, what I would talk to employers
Sure.
about is like, if you put someone on, they're resourceful, they're resilient. What you need to understand is in 12 months' time, you need to promote them into it. They'll show the area that they have interested in, and you need to bring them up.
Yes.
And then they bring someone
Yes.
else along.
Yes.
That's how that
Yes.
works. Not just like this
Yes.
is your job and
Yes.
like find them
Yeah.
an interest in that company and work out how you can progress them up the chain because you'll get a long-term loyal employee. They're very resilient.
Yes.
They're very resourceful. They'll turn up all the time because they're too scared because they like, oh, if I don't have this job, I
Yeah.
have to get another job.
Yes.
So that's some of the stuff that I try to teach business and government around how to sustain people
Yes.
with records and all that sort of stuff. Short time left. As always,
No
what
worries.
brings you joy and how do you fill your cup up that then helps you on flow to other people? What do you like to do in your downtime whenever?
Oh, what a great question. Um, so I guess for me, and you're just gonna think, oh, this is so twee. I very rarely in my life ever separated work from what brings me joy. And I've been one of these very lucky people who's been in jobs for purpose. I don't need to rescue people. I'm not a savior. I work in mostly Black African countries at the moment. I just think getting up every day and trying to make a difference to help people help themselves, that makes me want to get out of bed in the morning. Um, I have the joy of a loving relationship. I have the freedom of choice to travel and experience new cultures and understand different ways of viewing the world. And for someone with an itchy mind that needs to be stimulated, it's a perfect fit. What I also love and what fills my cup up, whether it was in Tooting in South London when I was a nurse and seeing people that I'd formerly treated. Hi, nurse. They couldn't remember my name. It didn't matter.
Yeah,
How you doing? I'm all right, and I'm clean. All of that right through to, um, you know, talking to governments with people with lived experience and trying to effect change. Whatever it is, it's all about the human beings in it. And as long as I don't lose sight of that, I'm never going to want to retire. I love the privilege of being in a role that brings me joy and brings good change.
yeah, nice.
So
And
on most days.
a lot of people talk about that connection and whatever that is for them, whatever they're connecting. And, I really believe in human connection. I know our time's going to run out.
Yes.
So I'm going to say goodbye.
No
because
worries.
It's timed out, just so you know. I'm not going to hang up on you. Thanks for your time.
No, that's all.
Really
That's all
appreciate it.
right.
We'll talk again soon. Thanks, Ivan.
We will. Take care.